Welcome back to Giant Monster Games. My name is Adrian, and today, well, maybe not today, but this weekend, if you're watching this video the weekend this comes out, I am playing at GP Montreal, which is the Grand Prix Montreal, which is happening at Place des Arts in Montreal. If you're there, come find me. I am playing some Magic, specifically Modern, which may not be any surprise to you. And, as you probably noticed from the title of this video, I'm going to be playing a deck called Death and Staxes, which is a Death and Taxes variant, similar to the Eldrazi and Taxes deck I did a while ago. So let's actually break that deck down and see what this deck actually is and how does it make itself different than the regular Death and Taxes variant. So as I said, this deck is a variant of the Death and Taxes deck. So what do we have that is actually taxes related to the Death and Taxes? Well, we have Leonin Arbiter, Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and Thalian Heretic Cather. So all these cards are doing the kind of stacks/taxes thing, where Leonin Arbiter, obviously your opponent's not going to go, or you, which we don't have fetch lands, but our opponent, theoretically, is not going to be able to go and fetch stuff out of their library, so when we blow up land, they have to pay mana if they want to go and search. If they want to actually go and use a fetch land, again, they're going to have to pay mana to search, so we're going to slow them down tempo-wise, which is really handy in Modern, especially because you rely on fetching to get consistent mana, so Leonin Arbiter, it does that. It's done that in every single Taxes deck ever, because Leonin Arbiter is a key piece to all those. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, she is making it so spells cost more. A lot of decks out there run a lot of spells. You see a lot of removal, making that removal cost 2 or 3, specifically if it's Assassin's Trophy, is going to make it so it's a lot better for us to slow our opponents down. Also, this card specifically may be able to shut down a bunch of decks, specifically Storm. It can really shut down Storm. And then Thalia Heretic Cather is actually a really good card for taxing our opponent. It is like the taxiest of most taxing. So opponents, creatures, and non-basic lands come into play tapped, which is really handy for just putting our opponents way off tempo. As you probably know if you've played Modern before, a lot of the lands that we play are non-basics. Our deck has a bunch of basic lands, but most decks are running a lot of non-basic lands, so them coming in tapped literally just slows our opponent down 1 turn per land, which is fantastic. And then, well, creatures coming to play tapped are also fantastic. So very good. That's what these cards are doing. They're just the taxes part of the deck. Now, what about the stacks style parts of this deck? Well, we have Chalice of the Void paired up with Simian Spirit Guide. So if you don't know what Chalice of the Void is, because I'm generally a budget channel and this card is not budget, but I do own a playset in paper, so I'm going to play this deck. So the Chalice of the Void is when it comes into play, you pay XX, and then you put X charge counters on it equal to what you paid. So if you paid 1 and 1, then you would put 1 charge counter. If you paid 2 and 2, which is 4 mana, you would then put 2 charge counters, and you get the idea. And then whenever a player, so that's us or our opponent, cast a spell with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters on Chalice of the Void, you counter that spell. So the idea being, we want to, because this deck actually, by the way, we have 0 1-drops in this deck, so we are going to play this usually on 1 as fast as we can. If we can play it on turn 1, awesome. If we can play it on turn 2, that's also pretty awesome, but it basically shuts down a lot of decks that are running very fast cards. So it shuts down Soul Sisters, it shuts down a lot of the Grixis decks, it shuts down Jund, because all of a sudden Inquisition or Thoughtseize are no longer super relevant, because your opponent can't cast them. Also, a lot of burn decks, again, they're using a lot of 1-drop spells, Lightning Bolt, Path to Exile, a lot of the things that, a lot of the removal right now that is relevant in Modern is a 1-drop. So Chalice of the Void basically puts all of our opponent's stuff off of that. So really freaking powerful. And then, as you probably saw, because you're looking at it on the screen right now, Simian Spirit Guide is allowing us to play this on turn 1. So Simian Spirit Guide is technically it's a creature, so we could play it as a creature, but we're never, ever going to be aiming to play this guy as an actual creature, because it has the ability where exile Simian Spirit Guide from your hand, add 1 red mana to your mana pool. So it's basically fast mana, but it's like a one-shot fast mana. So turn 1, we have any land that doesn't come into play tapped, which none of our lands come into play tapped. Play 1 land, exile Simian Spirit Guide out of our hand, tap that land, pay 1 mana for each of these 2 things, and then we actually get to play our Chalice of the Void on 1, turn 1, which shuts down a lot of the stuff our opponents are going to be doing. Super awesome, really, really funny. Now, in this deck, as you may have just seen as well, there are a bunch of other things we can be doing as Simian Spirit Guide. Specifically, Leonin Arbiter and Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, are also really good combinations to play with Simian Spirit Guide. So basically, turn 1, if we have a Simian Spirit Guide and or either any of these 3 cards, so any Chalice of the Void, Leonin Arbiter, or Thalia, Guardian of Thraben that is, we can actually play them turn 1, and all 3 of these cards extremely punish our opponent. Imagine playing Leonin Arbiter turn 1 before your turn if you're on the play, then your opponent can't play their fetch land, which is going to put them a huge off tempo. And that's the whole point of this deck, is to really push your opponent off tempo. And then the exact same thing with Thalia. If we're going to be playing this on turn 1, our opponent can't be bolting or pathing or thought seizing or inquisitioning us right away. We are basically throwing the ban hammer down on our opponent as fast as possible, which is one of the huge parts of this deck. So I've never actually seen, by the way, the whole like Simian Spirit Guide being played in a Death and Taxes deck, which is why I decided I was going to build this deck and play it, because it just looks really freaking fun. It's not my own idea, by the way. I don't think I mentioned that yet. This is not my own deck. This is a deck that is off of the Magic Salvation or MTG Salvation forums that I found that I thought was amazing, and I wasn't playing it because I own most of the cards. Okay, those are the taxes. Let's talk about the death part of the deck. So the other deck, the rest of the deck, is doing something else relatively interesting. So we are going to be running stuff like Eldrazi Displacer, Reality Smasher, and Thought-Knot Seer, 3 of my favorite cards. So this deck, on top of trying to really push your opponent like out of tempo and slowing your opponent down, it is also aiming to play big creatures way ahead of curve. And what do I mean by this? Well, as you probably can guess, we have in this deck as well Eldrazi Temple, which I'll get to and explain later. The thing you need to know about Eldrazi Temple is it creates 2 colorless mana if we are paying if we're using that mana to cast Eldrazi spells, which, as you can see, all 3 of these are Eldrazi spells. Eldrazi Displacer is a flicker effect, which we can use to make our opponent's creatures get tapped down, remove counters off of stuff, specifically stuff like, there's lots of things out there. Johnny's Pridemate might be one. I keep thinking of Soul Sisters because I'm also building Soul Sisters to take with me as a backup plan in case I really don't like the deck after a couple rounds. But yes, anyways, Eldrazi Displacer, we can use it to flicker stuff. It is really handy at making our opponent, tapping our opponent's stuff down, or removing our own stuff from harm's way, such as if we have a Reality Smasher out, our opponent has to discard a card just to target Reality Smasher, on top of it having Trample and Haste. So it's a 5/5 Trample Haste, then your opponent has to discard a card in order to target it. If we use our Eldrazi Displacer, we can just flicker it, and our opponent loses that card, which is super funny. And then Thought-Knot Seer is probably the best combination, actually, with this Eldrazi Displacer, because Thought-Knot Seer, when it comes into play, our opponent reveals their hand, we exile a card, non-land card, out of their hand, which is really handy, and then when it leaves play, our opponent draws a card. So if we are in our lockdown kind of situation, at the beginning of our opponent's turn on their draw step, after we've attacked it with Thought-Knot Seer on our turn before, we flicker Thought-Knot Seer at their draw step. We get to see their hand and the card they draw, including the card we just gave them, and then we get to remove the most relevant card. So it allows us to have constant card removal if we do get to the kind of mid to late game where we're trying to close out our opponent and just keep them really just tapped down. So that is a really good combination. On top of, again, these things just being really big, fast creatures, I do want to point out, Thought-Knot Seer in this deck is possible to play on turn 2. And there's been more than once where I've been like, I guess I'm going to play Thought-Knot Seer on turn 2 by discarding a Simian Spirit Guide, playing my 2 lands. So turn 1, play whatever land. Turn 2, play our Eldrazi Temple, exiling a Simian Spirit Guide, and then playing a Thought-Knot Seer on turn 2. Opponents don't really like that, but I think it's amazing. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, we do have a bunch of other cards into the other category here. We have 3 Dismembers. This is our removal. As you can see, Dismember is a, Phyrexia mana 1, so it's 3-drop, and we gotta give something a -5/-5. So this is really a last-ditch effort for us. We're not gonna use this to remove small stuff, we're gonna use it to remove big things, Tarmogoyfs, Death Shadow, sometimes removing stuff, a bunch of things. It's removing big stuff that needs to be removed, because we basically are paying 4 life just to cast this guy, so not gonna use it all the time, but it is something we're gonna use. And then Smuggler's Copter is really helping us get card filtering, because this deck sometimes, the one downside about this deck is sometimes once you get to the mid to late game, it can run out of gas, which kind of makes it start spinning its wheels, and usually your opponent can gain the advantage again. Smuggler's Copter, if we can get it into play early enough, we only have 2 of them in the deck. We do have other ways of drawing cards. It can allow us to start filtering cards in our hand that we don't want, because we do have a lot of land. We have 25 land in this deck, which is a lot. Actually, no, we have less than 25. We have a lot of land. We have a lot of land either way. So we have a lot of land, so sometimes we just want to be filtering out so as we can, Smuggler's Copter, if you don't know what it is a 3/3 flying creature when we crew it, and then whenever it attacks or blocks, so attacking or blocking is always really handy, we may draw a card and then discard a card. So very handy to filter our hand and keep the cards we want and just get rid of the cards we don't. So those are the other cards. Moving into land, though. Now it's time to talk about land. So, what do we actually have? Well, we have, as I was saying, Eldrazi Temple, Cavern of Souls, and this card is not a Shimmering... In my write-up, I have Shimmering Guado, which is not the card I was playing, but it's now going to be Horizon Canopy. So, Eldrazi Temple, because we're playing a lot of Eldrazi, specifically all of our win conditions are Eldrazi, we can be getting, something out faster, because it produces 2 colorless mana if it is being used to play Eldrazi spells. Cavern of Souls is one of the ways where we can prevent counter decks from countering our stuff, / we can use it to get white mana if we need. So sometimes you're going to name Eldrazi, which means your opponent can't cryptic command you or can't counter your stuff, which is really funny. Other times we're going to use it to name humans, or every so often cleric, specifically to cast our Leonin Arbiter. It happens. So, Cavern of Souls is a white mana source for white mana when we do need it, and it is also a way of preventing our opponent from countering our stuff when we get to the mid-game, which does become very relevant. There's a lot more control-y decks running out there nowadays, so it's relevant. And then, Horizon Canopy. Horizon Canopy is really awesome, and I'm actually borrowing this from my friend because I don't own them, because they're $60 each. They are basically pay 1 life, add green or white mana to your mana pool. 99% of the time it's going to be white mana, and then it also has the ability of pay 1, tap it, sacrifice it, draw a card. So, we get to the mid game, we no longer need land, we can play Horizon Canopy, crack it, sack it, draw a card. So it is, it's card filtering for us that is the big thing for us. We want to be able to have access to white mana so we can play the cards we want, but as soon as we start drawing too many lands, we can just crack it and get rid of it and draw a card. So, that is really important. The next lands we have, getting over there, we have Battlefield Forge, Mutavault, and Ghost Quarter. So, Battlefield Forge, we do want the option to, at some point, well, one, we want to produce colorless mana. So, Battlefield Forge produces colorless mana, it also produces white mana, but in like super fringe cases, sometimes we want to actually play the Simian Spirit Guide. So this is the one way of us actually playing Simian Spirit Guide if we need to. So that's why we're using Battlefield Forge and not some other random white and other color producing land, which there's a bunch of them. So that's the whole reason that's the whole reason for Battlefield Forge. Mutavault is a man land because sometimes we do need a man land. I ideally would rather be running something like Blinkmoth Nexus instead of Mutavault, but I don't have one and just didn't go around getting one. So I have Mutavault, so we're gonna play Mutavault. It seems to do the job 99% of the time, which is really handy. And then Ghost Quarter, this is a Death and Taxes deck, so that means if we use Ghost Quarter to blow up one of our opponent's stuff when we have a Leonin Arbiter into play, they they lose their land, which is really quite funny for me. So yes, Leonin Arbiter, super funny in combination with Ghost Quarter. It's really fancy. And then the last couple things we have a plains, we have 6 plains, and we have a single wastes when we do need non-fancy mana. Actually, I think we have 5 planes. Let me retract that. We have 5 planes, because, again, my notes I have here are different than the actual deck, which is really, really weird. And that is the entire main deck, but before we break down this sideboard and the upgrade section, if you want to pick this deck up in paper, go over to Flipside Gaming and use promo code GiantMonsterGames to get 10% off your online purchase. Or, if you want to pick this deck up for MTGO, there is a link to Card Hoarder in the description below this video. Both of these things help out the channel directly by you playing Magic. So, if you want to do that, that would be amazing. Okay, jumping over to the sideboard. Starting out, we have Path to Exile and Celestial Purge. So, if we do run into a situation where we're running up against a deck where removal is going to be more important than Chalice of the Void, such as our opponent doesn't really get affected by Chalice of the Void so much, we can swap out Chalice of the Void for Path to Exile and turn this more into an Eldrazi and Taxes type deck, which sometimes happens. Celestial Purge, which we're running one of, I kind of want to run 2, but we're running one of it because it really helps with a lot of stuff. Specifically nowadays is dealing with Death Shadow and a bunch of other red permanents. It's just a fast, easy exile effect, so we do have some removal if we do need it. And then we have a bunch of ways of getting rid of stuff. We have Disenchant, Stony Silence, and Rest in Peace. I guess Stony Silence doesn't get rid of stuff. It just prevents stuff being activated. So, Disenchant, destroy target artifact or enchantment. This is being used for ensnaring bridges and other things that we need to get rid of off our opponent's table. So, Disenchant is really handy. Stony Silence, obviously shutting down artifacts so our robot friends can stop being robot-y, I guess, on us. And then Rest in Peace is a way of us getting rid of graveyards and other, it's just getting rid of stuff in graveyards. That's the whole point of Rest in Peace. We're playing a white deck, why not run Rest in Peace? Because it's fantastic. And then the last couple cards we have in our sideboard, we have Ratchet Bomb, which is going to get rid of a bunch of tokens for us. And also, Ratchet Bomb can be slowly ticked up to get rid of other things. So if we are playing against, there's a number of decks out there where we might need to get rid of specific things. Ratchet Bomb will eventually get there and blow up a bunch of stuff for us. And then Worship, which is really quite funny. It allows us, as long as we can start getting creatures into play, we can use Worship to prevent ourselves from dying. Because, well, again, I've never played Worship before this deck, I should say, because I just never bought it, because it's an $8 card. It is if you control a creature. Oh, what? Was that not what it says? It says, if you control a creature, damage that would reduce your life total to less than 1 reduces it to 1 instead. Basically, this means you can't lose the game as long as you have a creature. So that's really gonna be handy for us, because every so often we're against a more aggro deck and throwing down stuff to prevent our opponent from overrunning us. It's gonna be really handy, especially the fact that we can usually slam this thing out on turn 3, usually reliably turn 3 with the Mana Monkeys, also known as Simian Spirit Guide. So yeah, that's the entire deck. So this is the deck I'm going to be running for the event coming up here in Montreal at the time where this video is coming up. It's also just a really fun deck. I've been playing a bunch on X-Mage, and I think it's really fun. Okay, until next time, my name's Adrian. There's no upgrade section because this is an upgraded deck already, as you can see, with the budget being somewhere around $1,000 already for this one. So yeah, anyways, my name's Adrian. Thanks to GiantMonsterGames. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to game like a giant monster. I would like to throw a huge shout out to all of the Patreons that have supported, even in my hiatus where I was off getting married and then doing a bunch of house-related stuff. You guys, Patreon supporters, thank you so much for supporting the channel. You guys are what makes me want to keep coming back and making more videos. Thank you so much.